Hey there guys, in this video we're going to be going over your 9.4 notes, part of your Unit 9 packet. So we're going to be going over test taking strategies and looking at a lot of past STAR questions in this section. Mostly for the test taking strategy that we're going to be working with, it's going to be called graph match. And you'll see what I mean by that, graph match or table match. But first we have to kind of review some key features that you've learned about quadratic equations. So we know that we have a standard form of a quadratic equation, or the way we usually see quadratic equations written, which is in the form f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Well, really important, the c value, which is the number without any variable, so it's usually at the end of your equation, tells you what the y-intercept is. So that's very helpful when eliminating answer choices. Usually they'll give you a picture of a graph and they say, okay, which of these following equations is the correct equation for the following graph? Well, if you look at the y-intercept on the picture and then the y-intercepts in the equations, you can eliminate some answer choices, but you'll see some examples of how to do that. Also talking about intercepts, something very important is that we have multiple words for x-intercepts, especially in relation to quadratic equations. The one you'll see most often is the word zero. So anytime you see the word zero, just know that they're talking about x-intercepts. But you might also see the word solutions or roots. So anytime you see the word zero, solutions, or roots, just know that they are talking about x-intercepts. Last thing we'll kind of review about quadratic equations is what a positive quadratic equation looks like and what a negative quadratic equation looks like. So for a positive quadratic equation, it is that U-shaped graph. So all quadratic equations will be having that parabola shape, which looks like a U. Positive quadratic equations will be facing upwards. And negative quadratic equations will be facing downwards. That will also help you to maybe eliminate some answers. So they give you a picture that's facing upwards, then you know your A value should be a positive A value. However, if they give you a picture that's facing downwards, then you know your equation is having negative a value, such as negative 2x squared or negative 1/2 x squared. But let's try to use some of these tips on these questions. Now, talking about other helpful hints that you can be using, these are just general calculator tips for graph match and table match. So first off, you should always start with a new page or graph for each new problem. So you don't want multiple graphs or multiple equations on the same page, so it'll get very confusing, so always start a new one. Make sure your variables are always x, especially if you're trying to graph them on your calculator. So they give you something like am squared plus bm plus c. Well, change all those m's to x's. Make sure your variable is always in x. Your equation must be in y equals form. If it is not, then you have to solve for y. And only type what comes after the equal sign, and Control T to get a table. You'll see what all these tips looks like throughout each example. So starting with example A, we have a graph of quadratic function shown below. So right here. And it says, okay, which of these functions best represented by this graph? So which of these equations correctly represents this graph? Now you can check every single function, but those are 4 equations to check. Not too much, but you do want to save some time on the STAR test. It is quite of a long test to be checking every single answer choice for. So first off, to eliminate some answer choices, we can do that by looking at our y-intercept, which is 8. So you have a y-intercept at 0, 8. And that tells you something very important. Remember, your y-intercept up here is your c value, the number at the end of the equation with no x. So we look at these equations here. All the ones I highlighted in green are c values or y-intercepts. So f and g are saying the y-intercept is 16, and h and j are saying the y-intercept is 18. Well, if I look at my graph, I can see that my y-intercept should be a positive 8, which means it cannot be f or g. They have the incorrect c value, the incorrect y-intercept. So we're going to eliminate choices f and g because they have incorrect c values which once again should be 8 because it represents the y-intercept. This is helpful because that means we only have to check 2 equations instead of checking all 4. But you could have checked all 4. But for time-saving purposes, you always want to try to eliminate answers. So now we'll pull up a graph. I have an online graph on my computer, but it's very similar to what you use in class. In fact, it's the same calculator, the TI Inspires. So never work on the scratch pad. Always start new graphs here. So I'm going to choose this blue option here for graphing. And I'm going to graph each equation. So let's start with answer choice H. Negative, and then I'll do control divide to get the fraction. 1/2 x, here's my square button, plus 8. And then I will press enter. And here's the shape. Now it's a little bit cut off. I don't see the top of my graph. I can zoom out if I want to see the top of it. What I prefer to do is table match. So what that means is I'm going to press control. On your calculator, so it's the yellow button, the control, and then T for table. So control T, and I get a table of values. And I'm going to match these table of values with the values given on this picture. So first off, I know that I need a y-intercept 0, 8. So here are all my x values. It starts at 1, so I'm going to scroll up 1 to get 0. 0, 8, okay, that's correct. But don't just check 1. You want multiple values that are similar. So now we have to identify what the zeros are. Remember, zeros just mean x-intercepts. So I see I have 2 x-intercepts here at -4 and +4. So I should have -4, 0 and +4, 0 in my graph. So let's see if I have that. So I'm going to scroll up so I can get to -4. -4, 0, okay. Scroll down, +4, 0. So since my table of values matched all these values here, then I know that H is correct. But let's say we want to try J, just in case. So I pull up J, I make a new graph, and I'm going to try the -x squared plus 8. So this time if I do control T, and I scroll up, I still get 0, 8, okay. But if I scroll up to -4, I get -4, -8. Remember, you wanted -4, 0. And if I scroll down to +4, you get +4, -8, which once again, you wanted +4, 0. So that's what it looks like when it does not graph match. You wanted to match exactly these values here. So that's why H was correct. So let's look at B. So B is kind of the opposite. Instead, they give you the equation and they want you to find the graph that matches this. So it says which graph is best represented by h of x equals x plus 1 in parentheses multiplied by x minus 3 also in parentheses. So we see that we have our options right here. And you have a few options. One of the easiest options is once again to graph match. So I'm going to put this equation into my calculator. I will only put in what goes after the equal sign. So I'm just going to put in this part of my equation. So once again, I'm going to go home and I'm going to start a new graph. And I'm going to have parentheses x plus 1 and parentheses x minus, not negative, minus 3. Now that I typed it, by the way, don't mind this. So you might have an F3, you might have F22, you might have F70. All that means is that it's storing all these functions. So for example, let me get rid of this right here for a second. If I scroll up, you see an F1. That was the first function I made. And then this is the second function I made. F3 is just the third one. So the number doesn't match. Also, you don't have to make it h of x. That doesn't matter as well. So never delete this, never change this, no matter what the number is. But I put it into my calculator. Well, I didn't press enter, so now I have to retype it. So x plus 1 and x minus 3. Enter. And I get this shape, which I can compare to some of these. But once again, I prefer to do graph match. So let me pull that back up. So here's my equation, or here is my graph. So let's see. Control T for table to table match. And I'm going to want to match some of these values. So I'm going to pick some of them. So if you look at your notes, we have this original table. So I'm going to fill it in based on the original equation. So the original table is using values from this right here. So we're going to start at -2, which should be 5. -1, which should be 0. 0, which would be -3. This is your y-intercept. And then my 1 and 2. So 1 should be -4 and 2 should be -3. So these are the values that these graphs have to match. So let's see which of these do that. So first off, this is telling me I should have a y-intercept at -3. So this is my y-intercept. So let's see, y-intercept at -3. F has a y-intercept of -3. Okay, perhaps. If you look at answer choice H, it actually doesn't have a y-intercept at -3. It has it sort of between 1 and -2. So it can't be H. G, if I look at G, same problem. It also doesn't have a y-intercept at -3. So I can eliminate that. And if I look at J, J does have a y-intercept at -3. So these two are okay. So I eliminate 2 of them. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to look at the other values. So -2 should be 5. So let's look here. -2, 5. Okay, that's correct. And then -1, 0. That's correct. 0, -3, we already checked that, which was correct. 1, -4. That was correct. And then 2, -3. So it looks like F is probably my answer choice. It matches all these points in the original table. So then we're going to look here in J. So if I look at part J, let's see, -2, 5. -2, 5 is right here. You can already tell it right off the bat that J does not match. And then if you keep going, -1, 0 is still incorrect. So my answer is F. And this is once again called table matching. So this is answer choice, oops, not A. Answer choice F. So C says, given f of x equals x squared minus 36, which statement is true? So, same thing that we were doing before, we're going to get our calculator and we are going to table match, or graph match in this case. So I'm going to put in my original equation, which is x squared minus 36, and I'll press enter and it'll give me a pink graph. Now when they give you an equation and then you have to match it to another equation, then you're going to put both equations on the same page. So to do that, you'll press tab and it'll let you put in another equation. So in this case, let's try answer choice F, x minus 6 multiplied by the other binomial, x minus 6. And you can see that these graphs don't match. So now we're trying graph match. So the green graph and the pink graph are very different. So it is obviously not answer choice F. And then to answer this part here, 0 is another word for, remember, x-intercept. But we're not even looking at that part of the answer yet, because we're trying to see which one matches. So I'm going to press tab, press up, and I'm going to change this one. So it wasn't the x minus 6. It wasn't that answer choice. So let's try G. X minus 18. And then another x minus 18. And once again, make sure you're using minus, not times, or negative. Can't see it. So let me do Control T. I'm going to compare the values. Ooh, this one's really off. So not that one. So not G. I'm going to press tab and up again. And I'm going to try answer choice H, plus 6 and minus 6. Ooh, so you see now I can't see the pink graph, I only see the green graph. Well, if I kind of hover off it, you can kind of see the pink graph for a second, which this is what we call a table match. Also, if you do Control T, this is your pink graph, and this is your green graph. And notice negative 35, negative 35, negative 32, negative 30. All the values match. Negative 27, negative 27, negative 12, negative 11. They all match, which is called a graph match. So that's what you're doing. So when they give you an equation and a graph, you'll table match. When they give you a graph and an equation, you'll table match. However, if they give you two equations, that's where you graph match. So in this case, it is H, because they're exactly the same graph. So we're almost done. So now we're going to D. And same thing again, they're giving us two equations. So this one says which one is equivalent to y equals 3 times the quantity of x plus 2 squared plus 7. And our first question is, what does equivalent mean? Well, equivalent means the same. So graph match, which equation matches that equation. So you can do table match if you want, but let's look at our picture. So let's graph match this. So now that we're on a different question, each time you're on a different question, you can make a new graph. So 3 times the parentheses, x plus 2 squared plus 7. Enter. Can't see my equation, which probably means it's a little bit up here. So I can see it here. By the way, if you press Control and then this button here, it lets you drag around on your computer. It's easier for me since I'm on desktop, but if you're using a handheld, that's how you would move it around. So if you need to see your graph. So let's find one that matches this. So let's try answer choice A. So since we're still doing the same question, I'm not going to go back home and make a new page. I'm just going to press tab and put in my next answer choice. And once again, you see f of 7. That just means this is the seventh function this calculator is storing. Don't mess with that. Don't change that. And we're only going to type in what goes after y. So 3x squared plus 12x plus 33. Enter. Can't really see the other graph, so I'm going to try to do Control T. Maybe it's covering it, so I need to double check. So this one should be 34, my orange graph. And my new graph is slightly brown graph. Should be 48, 34. They do not match. So it is not answer choice A. Now I go to answer choice B. So Control T to get rid of that table, and then I'm going to press tab and delete this. Just so I don't have multiple graphs on the same page. So 3x squared, I shouldn't have deleted all of it. 3x squared plus 12x. This one has a plus 19. Ooh, so you can kind of see that I can no longer see my orange graph. There is now a brown graph over it, which most likely means it's a table match or graph match, but I'll do Control T. You'll probably hear my dogs in the background. 34, 34, good. 55, 55, so you can tell that they match. My orange graph matches the other graph that's directly on top of it. So Control T to get rid of that. So they are the same graph. So you can kind of see that they're on top of each other. Overlapping, which means my answer choice is B. Two more examples. So this one says, which value of x is the solution to this equation? Now, solution means x-intercept, first off. Remember, that's one of our words. All the way in the beginning of our notes. Zero, solution, roots all mean x-intercepts. So, we need to find which of these is the x-intercept. But it is not solved for y. Y is not by itself. Well, there's no y in here visible, but what that means is everything needs to be on one side. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this 5x squared by subtracting 5x squared from both sides. So that 0 equals negative 5x squared. It can't combine with any of these values since they're not like terms. Plus the positive 30x minus that 45. So notice all your equations are in this form, where you have your x squared, your x, and your number by itself. So that's all I did, was make it so that it's in this form, so that I can graph it. So, different question, different page. So I'm going to make a new graph. And it is negative 5x squared plus 30x minus 45. And I want to see which of these is my x-intercepts. So remember, x-intercepts are written in the form of number, comma, 0. So my graph is here, so I can kind of see my graph. So I can see that my graph is positive 1, positive 2, positive 3. But in case I want to make sure, I can look here. Ooh, right here is one of them. 3, 0. Number, comma, 0. So my x-intercept is a 3. So it's A. And everything was not moved to one side, so we have to move the 5x squared to the other side. And remember, when you move one side to the other, you have to change signs. So this positive 5x squared, different side, different sign. So it becomes negative 5x squared. And it can't combine with anything. So how to find the solution? Look for the x-intercept on the graph or table. So either graph match, table match. Last question. So in this case, it says what is the domain of the domain and range of g of x equals 1/4 times the quantity x minus 17 squared plus 61. So this is just a domain and range question. However, usually when you have domain and range, you have a picture to look at. In this case, you don't really have a picture. So you can graph it on your calculator so you can look at a picture. So remember that domain relates to x values and range relates to the y values. This one is asking for both. So we're going to be looking at both our x and y values. But something really, really important, unless they draw actual stopping points, quadratic equations will always have a domain of all real numbers, which is represented by that R that has the two lines starting it. So does this graph go up or down is something important to ask yourself. If you look at your A value, it's positive, so you know that you have a domain that's positive, so we know that our quadratic equation is positive, so it faces upwards, which means my graph faces up. Which means if it faces up, that means your y values are greater So it should be using the symbol greater than or equal to. And what is the maximum minimum value? Well, that'll be your vertex, which you can graph to find. But with this information, we can eliminate a decent amount of answers. For example, you should know the domain is always all real numbers because it will always point forever to the left and always point forever to the right. F has all real numbers as domain, perfect, but notice that G does not. So G is incorrect. H has all real numbers for domain, which is great, but J does not. And we know that X values relate to domain. However, if we look at answer choice H, notice that range is using X, which is incorrect. So without even actually graphing it or without even actually using a calculator, you can use process of elimination to get your correct answer. So in this case, domain is all real numbers. We want to be greater. And we have our answer. So this concludes the notes videos for 9.4 Graph Match. So you'll be using similar strategies throughout your practice. So if you ever get stuck, look back here and kind of look at the notes that you did with your teacher or with this video. If you struggle with 9.4, remember we always have tutoring every day before school or after school, so feel free to sign up. Thank you and have a nice day.